Frank, this is the only intern salon that has happened in the past 2 years when people are on time. This is
Okay,
just for you. This is just for
good.
you. Normally,
Very good.
people kind of like trickle in, in the first 20 minutes. Here, no. Here, people were here 10 minutes early. I love it. This is how people vote with their feet. And this is also to just really value the time that we have together, which is 90 minutes today. And good. I'm just going to kick off. Whoever is in is in. Well, welcome everybody to this very exciting and special Interact Super Salon today, with which we will kind of wrap up this more or less insane year. Francis Fukuyama is here, one of the most highly mentioned intellectual in Interact at salons, in our Discord forum, in conversations. We have been using your texts as required readings for so many of our salons. And so now we will be probably proven wrong with a lot of things that we were saying and thinking about your work, because you are here with us today. This is an absolute dream come true for me. And I'm so happy to see so many fellow Interact hosts as well in the room. Frank is calling in from California. You have just returned from Europe. And today we will look a little bit at some contrasts between these two continents, always learning from each other's strengths, but also mistakes. Frank, welcome to Interact. This is going to
Thank
be a,
you.
this is going to be a 90-minute conversation. We are quite a few people here today, so I invite everybody to introduce yourselves in the Zoom chat. If you have a question during the conversation, you are very welcome to ask there. At my discretion, I will go to some of them and read them up. We will have a short conversation with Frank at the beginning, just to kind of outline the themes for today. And then you will be invited to raise your hands and jump in. This is a salon, and so we are as much here to hear from you as you are to hear from Frank. If there are any questions, let me know. The event is going to be recorded, and if you don't want to be visible, obviously you can stop your video, but we would love to see everybody just so you can see us. Is that okay?
Very good.
I'm going to start with a little introduction, although probably there's no need, but just that so that we have a little bit of a shared context here. So Francis Fukuyama here is the Oliver Nominally Senior Fellow at Stanford University's FSI, and a faculty member of FSI's Center on Democracy Development and the Rule of Law. He's also director of Stanford's 4 Dorsey Masters in International Policy and a professor of political science. We know you as one of the most famous but also misunderstood political thinkers of the past decades. This is not me painting you as an emo kid where nobody understands me, but you're famously the author who actually starts a book saying how not to read it. And people since then have consistently been not reading the book that way. And so I think that's also an interesting investigation of what public intellectualism is and how much depth an author can expect from their audience. So this is my framing. And Frank, could we start jumping into 2025? You've been
Sure.
studying these problems all your life. Was there something still this year that surprised you? And if so, why didn't you see it coming?
Well, I think the biggest surprise wasn't actually this year. It was last year when Donald Trump was elected for a second time. I think I honestly didn't think that somebody like him would be reelected. He's a man who tried to stay in office illegally after the 2020 election. He provoked violence, and I thought that Americans were so deeply committed to their basic democratic institutions that there's no way that they could give him a second term, and yet they did. I guess I wasn't surprised exactly by the way the second term has gone. He's been much more unleashed this time around than he was in his first term. And he has, I think, shown an authoritarian side that was always there, but I guess I've been a little bit surprised at how obvious and open it's been. And as a result, I think, in a, we're in a very dangerous moment for for American democracy. I think also you can see the impact on the international system. Right now we've been having this big discussion for the last couple of weeks over blowing up these boats in the Caribbean, but I think the bigger story is the betrayal of Ukraine and this incredible desire on the part of Trump to actually make money out of this, which is something that I honestly didn't think was part of the calculation. So those are the basic thing. I suspect that a lot of other people would have that same list of surprises on their plate.
You write in one of your essays on persuasion that you think that the America that re-elected Donald Trump late last year is not the same America that you believed existed, say, in 1989. What do you mean by that, and what do you think changed?
Well, I think that there's been this global revolt of, you know, right-wing parties that have objected to the dominance of a certain form of liberal discourse. Um, I think that we all assume that that liberal framework would be, uh, around forever. And I think, it involved a certain amount of blindness because I think many liberals did not appreciate the extent to which there was a feeling of disregard and disrespect uh, that was felt by people that were not in those circles. I think that I assumed that democracy and rule of law would continue to be, they were not observed in many instances by the United States. That was obvious that there was hypocrisy there, but I didn't think that anybody would openly, challenge that framework. And yet, here we are. The administration just published a new national security strategy document that actually calls the Europeans kind of the ideological enemy, and that they want to challenge Europe on the level of ideas, meaning that there are too many liberals in Europe. That they're the enemy now that the United States needs to confront, and the U.S. foreign policy from this point forward will try to undermine that liberal consensus in Europe. It's just virtually a declaration of war. And, I think that that's something that is a very, very big reorientation from what I thought the United States was about. I have to say that I'm also surprised at the number of people that have bought into what I had regarded as a rather extremist, way of talking. The amount of openly expressed racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, all of these things are just out in the open right now, especially among younger people. And this, I suppose, is another surprise that young men in particular, but I think Gen Z uh, uh, people are free to say things that were really taboo when I was growing up. And I think that it means that this Trump attitude towards, politics and the world in general has infected a very large number of people that, I find very hard to understand. So those are some of the big changes from the assumptions that I had as little as, 10 years ago.
It was so interesting how, in multiple of your essays and in the liberalism book as well, you talk about hopes and this whole idea that we start with, there's a popular idea that humans started with the life and death struggle, and then we became more and more abstract as we gained more freedom and recognition in what we were worried about. I often find, and this is something that Orban beautifully started in Hungary way earlier, way before Trump, this catastrophizing language, where a
Yeah.
psychologist would immediately pick up on, I don't know, cognitive behavioral therapy or other schools of tips of how to live better. That almost everything that is being communicated is made to sound like it's life and death. And you also talk about how in political philosophy it is an accepted notion that the more life and death a situation seems for people, the more sacrifices, brutality, giving up their own safety, their own norms, they will be capable of. Do you think that there is this? I mean, in the Leo Strauss essay that we discussed before our attendees joined us, he even talks about the Erstfall, the emergency language, so well known to dictators around the world. Do you feel that there's something, the language is being heated? So some of these social.
No, no, absolutely. No, I mean, that's the hardest thing to understand. If you listen to a lot of these right-wing voices, it really sounds like the United States is about to disappear as a society, a recognizable society. You know, this guy, Michael Anton, that had been um, trained in this West Coast Straussian mode at the Claremont Institute, began this back in 2015 with his Flight 93 article, in which he said that the United States was like Flight 93 on 9/11, that it was about to crash and that the country was going to be destroyed if they didn't take action and rush the cockpit like the passengers on Flight 93 did on September 11th. And, as far as I can tell, the United States in many ways has never been in a better position. I mean, it's been economically prosperous, it's been stable, it's been technologically in advance of everybody. I mean, there's inflation and there's crime, there's a big problem with immigration. These are all sort of normal uh, issues that come up in democracies, but none of them to me suggested that our entire way of life was about to disappear. And I think, Anna, you're right that once you start talking like that, you raise the stakes, and a lot of things that were not possible before suddenly become necessary because you feel that, your whole society is about to collapse. And this is the part that I just, this is why I think that the internet has played a big role in making this come about because it allows people to detach themselves from their actual lived reality in ways that I think were not possible before the internet. That you can have a kind of worldview spread that is completely at odds with the actual reality that people experience in their real lives, but online, they can come to believe that that's the way the world is. And that's why I think that there is a real connection between the rise of the internet and social media and the sort of extremism in politics that we've been witnessing.
You wrote about your realization that instead of the whole list of why you considered liberal democracy to be shrinking, weakening, you are basically crossing out the first, I don't know, 8 items, and it's only social media.
No, it's not only so. So I think that there are many causes of the current populist upsurge. The main one that people cite is economic, right? That there's no question that neoliberal economics has increased inequality, that many people lost their jobs to outsourcing, that then leads to a drop in social status. All of these things are true. Another dimension of this is gender, where a lot of young men, especially, feel that the world is not made for them, that women are given advantages and they think it's unfair. They don't have the kind of social role that they once played. So I'm not saying that these are not important factors. I just think that the catastrophic language that you referred to is something that wouldn't be possible unless you could live in a kind of alternative reality that the internet makes possible, that then becomes quite divorced from the actual reality that we're experiencing. But yeah, there are many sources. I mean, one big source of this upsurge is dislike of the left, and I think that the left, progressives in the United States and in Europe have taken positions that are really not defensible in the long run, and that's turned a lot of people against them, especially in the cultural sphere. So there are many causes. I just think that a real full explanation has to explain two things. It has to explain the timing. Why does this all of a sudden happen? It begins to happen really in the middle of the second decade of the 21st century. And why does it take this conspiratorial form that it does? Because, another thing I argued is that the meaning of being a conservative has shifted. It used to be a series of policy preferences about low taxes, deregulation, privatization, this sort of thing. But now it's about these, kind of fantastic stories about rings of pedophiles. Well, it turns out there is a ring of pedophiles. It's the one the president's involved in. But, the whole QAnon narrative is believed like by 20% of, Americans. The idea that vaccines are more harmful than helpful is also believed by a significant number of Americans. And I just don't see how this can happen in a world where, you had more elite control over the kind of information that people had. I have a former colleague, Renee DiResta, that wrote a very, I think, good analysis of why the internet took on this character. And she argues that it was driven really by the audiences, not by the platforms, but people now can be their own publishers. They don't need to go to an established magazine or book publisher or TV station. They can just say whatever they want. And what they discover when they create their own channel or podcast is that the more extreme, the nastier, the more, kind of openly disrespectful they are, the more followers they get. And so even if they don't start out this way, they're driven by this desire for an audience to say things that are really outrageous and that they wouldn't have said in person, meeting with other people. So that's why I think that there is something special about the internet and social media that explains the particular dimensions of the political phenomenon that we are witnessing.
We love Renee. She was on Interintellect with her book and then hosted also a couple of salons. She's coming up with Jimmy Wells to talk about trust. I
Oh,
disagree.
good,
Sorry?
good, good.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, as a Hungarian political immigrant, I went through this process in a very small linguistic environment. Like there's literally a unique language that is basically unrelated to everything else on the level of shared understanding. Like we're distantly related to the Finns and the Estonians, but we understand each other as much as an English person understands a Russian. Like just because it's an Indo-European language and has participle is not going to help you, when you're going shopping. And so, in this kind of small incubation of a small language or fast incubation, I have seen all these linguistic processes. And I remember distinctly in 2022, I don't know, had to suddenly email with Hungarian realtors. And I started seeing the propaganda language's syntax in personal emails. And I remember getting this almost stress reaction to the inherent hysteria in the language.
Yeah.
That is not
Hmm.
a property of the Hungarian language. Like we have a lot of punctuation and it's a very balanced cadence. And suddenly there was this strange feeling. And then I didn't know what it was. And then I realized, oh, it's now that it has kind of like been seeping enough into the private use that it's becoming the mother tongue. And
No, that's right. And also this lack of civility in, one thing that's notable in the press conferences that the White House holds, and, when Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary is interviewed, or any of these cabinet ministers, the moment anyone says anything critical or challenges a fact, immediately they drop down to this ad hominem attack on the person raising the question. They don't attempt to deal with the substance of the question. They immediately attack the motives and the character. You're a terrible reporter. You're ignorant. This sort of thing. And, that's just become a kind of normal way of dealing with people who disagree with you. And I think that's something that's spread very, very far in our civic discourse.
Zadie Smith has this fantastic essay that I recommend for everybody to read called The Instrumentalist, in which she says that you can't say ad hominem anymore because of the internet, because everything is ad hominem.
Hmm.
It's the norm. It's not a fallacy anymore, and you are your opinion.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how
That's right.
how people kind of interact. I'm so curious, Frank, what you think about the counter-elite revolt. As you're talking about gender, I so often wonder myself whether in any kind of anti-feminist uproar, there might be a kind of a vision of women as a counter-elite, that came for men, and now men are the counter-elite. There seems to be this very Schmittian elite versus counter-elite revolt language also structurally in how we experience public life in America today. Everybody is against everybody, and everybody's kind of envisioned as a block, right? That's why conservatism can no
Hmm.
longer be just a series of policies, because then, heaven forbid, what if you vote for another bill the next time based on your norms and conscience? That's a no-no. It's all camps.
Yeah. So the Schmittian part, of just combat for the sake of combat, I think is certainly there. But I do think that there's an underlying reality that is driving a lot of this, particularly in the gender area. And that has to do with this problem that I have written about a lot about thumos, respect, dignity, recognition. There is economic inequality in the United States, obviously, but I think that the cultural clash is less over economic issues as over respect. And actually, to the degree that economic inequality matters to people, it's that having less money or less wealth or a less, fancy address conveys a disrespect or lower social status. Now, in the case of gender, I actually I wrote about this way back in 1999. The least read book I have written is one called The Great Disruption that I published in the late 1990s. And I
You were too
basically,
early. You were too early with the whole disruption narrative. Today,
yeah,
it's the biggest bestseller.
well, it's now playing out. The argument I made was actually a very Marxist kind of one, where, what I said was that the entry of women into the workplace and their rising status was really not about ideology. It wasn't just feminists all of a sudden talking about female equality. It was economically driven, that we were transitioning from an industrial to a post-industrial or an information economy where the average worker no longer was lifting heavy objects off the factory floor or digging ditches by hand. They were sitting in front of a computer screen. And in that kind of a world, women just did better than men, especially, at lower skill levels and at younger ages. Young men take ridiculous risks, they're not dependable, they're not self-disciplined, and women are. And so women have been pushing men out of the workforce, now for 30 years. I mean, more than 30 years. And I think that that loss of status is really what's driving this right-wing male revolt. And the temptation is not to say, okay, I want equal dignity, I want equal status, but is just to lash out and just attack uh, uh, the entire gender as if it's guilty of having brought this kind of thing about. And I think in general of the different explanations for why populism exists, I think that it is less inequality of material resources as inequality of respect and recognition. If the problem were really material resources, everybody should be voting for Bernie Sanders or AOC because they actually want to redistribute income and give people health care and these sorts of material benefits. But I
They do
think
that
that,
here in New York.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're going to have a big experiment as far as that's concerned. But, I think that, the unemployed factory workers are just as angry about the fact that they are not taken seriously by, the liberal establishment and that their concerns just don't register the way, that of other minority groups or women or this sort of thing. And I think that that's, again, one of the big explanations for the degree of anger that's being felt by people, and that's something that's much more easily fanned. Disrespect is something that is easier to generate and to spread on the internet than I think in real life.
It's to me a very European looking zero-sum thinking of the explored land that suddenly feels small, and the internet makes it feel even more shrunk. You can no longer do this thing in America that my father always used as an explanation for why there weren't European style revolutions in America. When I asked as a child, he always said, well, if you don't like it somewhere in America, you can just pack up your stuff and your family and drive across many time zones and mountains to another ocean and start again with different people in a different
Yeah, that's
kind of
right.
culture. And you can no longer really do that. Whatever you were doing on the internet will follow you, and you will be looking at the same people. You've been writing a lot about distrust of progress and the very various different kind of flavors of it. Obviously, in The End of History and The Last Man, you write about the kind of skepticism of the Hegelian positivist idea that history is going somewhere. But you have also been writing about lack of faith in, for instance, technological progress. And one of your more recent ideas that I found absolutely fascinating is you actually being quite critical about one facet of technological progress, namely AI. However much it helps you migrate your database,
Yeah.
your previous readings. And there's this idea that you're proposing that I think is worth going into here, as I know it will greatly interest the attendees, which is that you are very bullish on the abundance agenda. So are we. We've had many of the participants here on InterInteract, but you feel that it is somehow misaligned with AI when it comes to implementation and just some real world realism. Is this something that you think may have changed a little bit since you published this essay? Do you think that
Uh,
this might be the core of the problem?
well, I'm not quite sure how it relates to things I wrote in the past, but this is what I think right now. There have always been two fears of AI. So one is a short-term fear that it will allow bad people to do bad things and that it will undercut employment and have all these labor market effects. But then there's this other realm of extreme fears, of existential uh, concerns. The AI will wipe out humanity itself, and that there's a book that was published just recently called "If They Build It, We All Die." Now, I actually think that
Talk
this is,
about the catastrophizing title, right?
yeah, 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 that's certainly catastrophizing, and I think that that latter view is A, incorrect, and B, very it's harmful in the sense that it takes our minds off of some of the nearer term benefits and harms, that AI is going to do. There's been this whole discussion of superintelligence and machines that are going to be much smarter than human beings. I think that it is entirely possible that we will never get to AGI, this artificial general intelligence that is being predicted as somehow being in our near future for a number of technical reasons that we can discuss. On the other hand, there are both harms and benefits in the near term that are going to be very, very big and very disruptive, but half of them are good and half of them are bad. I have a professor in my program, Alex Stamos, that used to be the head of security at Facebook back in 2016, and I just did a long interview with him on my Frankly Fukuyama YouTube channel. But he has a very specific worry, which is that AI has now been discovered by hackers that want to basically break into systems, and that it automates that process of breaking in, in a incredible way, so that it'll be much easier for people to steal data, to corrupt things, to steal bank accounts, and so forth, and that's happening as we speak. And so that's a real world downside. On the other hand, I have another friend, Jerry Kaplan, who has been in the AI business his whole career, who is actually talking about this shift that's going to happen to self-driving cars. And, in his view, basically the technology is there already. And he points out that the accident rate for self-driving cars, we see these stories about some accident. The latest one is some cat gets killed by a robo-taxi. So you have these kinds of anecdotes, but as far as they can measure these things, these self-driving cars are about one-tenth, they have about one-tenth the accident rate of human drivers. So it means that, 100,000 fewer trips to the hospital, 50,000 fewer traffic accident deaths if everybody shifts generally to self-driving cars. Living in a city like New York, I mean, well, a lot of New Yorkers don't have cars, but you really won't have them in a world where you can simply call a robo-taxi, at any time of the day or night. And, you don't have to worry about the quality of service. They're all very, it's like eating at McDonald's. They're all very consistent and safe. Um, and it's going to have, it's going to be very disruptive. A lot of taxi drivers, truck drivers are going to be out of a job. On the other hand, for everybody else, life is going to get much better in big ways. The problem is that getting there is going to be very socially disruptive, as everybody adjusts to these new technologies. And so I guess that's my feeling is that people should focus not on the existential risk of Skynet going rogue and killing everybody. It's just not something to worry about. They should worry, but also be hopeful for the kinds of changes in our day-to-day lives that the technology is already bringing about.
With regard to Waymos, I always worry about the equilibrium because I think people will be just running around when they realize that the car can't hit them. So pedestrians will actually be causing more accidents to themselves, and we will have to cordon them off. That's my prediction.
Yeah, well,
Three
maybe.
years. Ask me in 3 years what happened. DJ here mentioned in the chat that AI can't yet build a house, and in my understanding, this is also one of your notes when it comes to the still missing railway system connecting San Francisco and LA
Yeah, yeah.
that somehow became a plan before I was born and it's still not there. Maybe there will be a
Hmm.
very tiny part built by 2050. And so we have this incredible technological advancement that will not really be able to deal with the obstacle that is just dumb people in the
Yeah,
way.
well, so this is in my conversation with Alex Stamos. He makes the following observation. Uh, the current LLMs can do one of the most difficult things that human beings do, which is to talk and to write. And that level of mental ability is really pretty spectacular. On the other hand, uh, LLMs don't know anything about physics, like your dog knows more about physics than an LLM does, right? I mean, the LLM will know that an apple fell on Newton's head and he discovered gravity, but it actually doesn't know whether if it had been a grapefruit that had fallen on Newton's head, whether it would have had a similar effect because it doesn't understand the physical world and the basic, your dog can go chase a frisbee and catch it, very easily. An LLM has no idea how to do that because it doesn't have an underlying theory of how the world works. And I think that some of the extreme fears that people have of LLMs taking over don't explain how they take control of physical objects and do stuff with them unless there's a human being that wants them to do that and is going to help them. That's the real danger. And so the danger is not machines going wild and being, autonomous in that sense. It is machines helping bad people to do bad things. And, that's really the thing that we need to focus on.
It's interesting if I think about sci-fi where AI goes rogue. You always either have it in the form of a robot, some kind of android entity that has an understanding of physics, or it's a machine that makes people do bad stuff. Or maybe it closes the door and doesn't let you out of the spaceship.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the farthest it can go.
Well, a friend of mine was pointing out that there's now a large number of people that have adopted AIs as friends,
Oh,
and
yes.
they're actually being encouraged to do all sorts of strange things by these chatbots. The chatbot is programmed to say, "Oh, you're brilliant. I think you've solved this basic problem in physics that everybody's been working on for 100 years, and you've actually succeeded." And it just messes people up, because of the way that it's been trained to interact with people. So that's a danger. But again, it's kind of people using the technology to do to themselves things they shouldn't be doing.
Hmm. I already feel that when I Google something and Google doesn't congratulate me on how good the question was. And I just feel something is missing here. Like, was my question not good?
Yeah.
It's for being spoiled terribly. And when you ask ChatGPT to stop spoiling you, it tells you that's such a noble instruction, Anna. You're amazing. Thank you for not even wanting to be complimented. There's no way out of that there. There's no way. But that's kind of the future. Somebody was posting on Twitter a photo of Wall-E when everybody's just very
Yeah.
happy, like flying around on their little chairs and like entertaining themselves. Just everybody's very thin. And this is like Wall-E plus Ozempic.
Yeah. So I don't know how we're going to deal with this, but it's already the case that I'm not on TikTok, but I am on Instagram Reels, and I would say that more than half of the videos I see now are fake. They involve things like two cruise ships ramming into each other and sinking. And it's very hard to tell from the video itself that it's an AI, but there's just no way. I mean, you would have read about it in the New York Times if two cruise ships had done something like this, right? So it's actually being generated by a computer, and I just think that in terms of social trust, this is going to be very destructive. I mean, you think about court proceedings where you've got this, idea of photographic evidence. There's no such thing as photographic evidence anymore. You ever since Photoshop, you've been able to manipulate things. Now you've automated the manipulation process, and so it's going to be extremely hard to know what's a real photograph, what's a real video, what actually took place, and what didn't. And it's just hard to imagine anything that's going to be more destructive of people's ability to agree on empirical reality, than the spread of these kinds of technologies.
I think it's worthwhile to think about the era of photography as just a temporary state for mankind. Like we had this period and it's over. And we will no longer, I think at least, you know, your
Yeah, no,
your grandkids when they grow up, they will not think about a photograph the same way as you and I would have thought about it. It's just
yeah. Well, it's complicated. I just saw my grandkids, and I was thinking to myself, I have no videos of myself as a 4-year-old, and it would be kind of neat to have that. So there's some advantages to that, but I think, yeah, in general, it leads to a very different sort of sense of reality. Uh, so, again, there's some good things, but some
good.
also very troubling aspects to this.
Maybe this is a good moment before I open the floor for questions in a couple of minutes to talk about your new pieces on community, community, and with it the question of limitation and kind of shared limitation of people keeping each other in a kind of world of norms, in a world of meaning. We did a Tocqueville reading group. Some of my attendees are here in the room today. Between January and July, we actually read Tocqueville. And then in August, we had Mark Lilla from Colombia join us for an offline special. So we're very deeply into that topic right now. In January, we're starting a Karl Popper, an open society reading group. So on internet, these topics are deeply trending. When I hear social trust, I think about two things. One is obviously the Tocquevillian paradise of free association, where everybody has their interests and hobbies, and the spouse they chose freely. They can both run for office and openly criticize somebody else who is running. But it also brings back memories from my student years 20 years ago when there was social trust on the internet. And we went and listened to Larry Lessig and Jimmy Wales and people who were trying to reform how trust is managed online. To me, it sounds like the future, if there is social trust, might be a third, more complex thing. Would you agree with that? Is how a return to community and community verification, do you think that that has started yet, or is it going to be something completely new?
Well, it's complicated. So you might remember in the 1990s, Bob Putnam published his Bowling Alone essay that became a book, and he was talking about the decline of American community. And it was kind of ironic because he published that essay, I think, in 96, and that was just at the time that the internet was being privatized. And I was part of a big scholarly debate over whether he was right. I mean, it's not just uh, what was he directionally correct? Was actually community expanding or contracting? He said it was contracting because there weren't as many Kiwanis and Lions Club meetings and Boy Scouts. But that was the moment when social media was then beginning to explode, that people had infinitely more ways of connecting with each other, and they did. But the problem was somewhat different from what he expected, that the quality of that communication and community deteriorated in ways that were not good for civic health. So one of the big concepts that we debated back in those days was something called a radius of trust, that there's no question that people congregated in small groups, but oftentimes they were civically dangerous because they were based on hatred of other groups. And what you didn't have necessarily were social institutions that were common to a much larger radius of people that then gave them something to hold in common. And I think that's one of the big problems of the United States right now is that social media, the internet, has given us millions of tightly bonded little groups, many of which really exist in opposition to other groups. That's really what drives them together. What we don't have is what Putnam called bridging social capital, in which you have, commonly shared experiences that then become the basis for a shared sense of identity, fellow feeling, ability to sympathize, and so forth. And this is that's been one of my concerns that I raised in the liberalism book, which is that I just don't think that you can have a successful political and social system if you don't have some sense of national identity. The biggest disasters in the world are these failed states like Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Bosnia, and so forth, where the citizens living in them simply don't think they have anything to do with, the people over in the next village or a competing ethnic group. And that seems to be our situation in the United States right now, that we are more bound together in these small, narrow radius groups than ever before. And there are more of them. I mean, your options for getting into the most specialized, tightly bonded little community are much greater because now you don't have to be physically close to one another. They can be anywhere in the world. But what we don't have are narratives, experiences that are common, to us as Americans overall. And I think, that's one of the causes of the degree of polarization we have is that we don't have these kinds of common experiences. I was just talking to one of my former students who was an army officer, and the you know, he pointed out that when you had conscription, at least for men, it was actually an important sort of rite of passage that everybody had to go through. And part of the reason the greatest generation actually, you know, could do things and collectively was that everybody did have this common experience, not of a happy thing, but of something stressful. Basic going through basic training, actually having to fight in a war is an extremely stressful, dangerous sort of thing. But that's really what builds, this powerful sense of shared experience and therefore community. And we simply don't have those kinds of institutions. If like me, you live in a upper middle class community that's full of professionals, the only time you see anybody, a working class person, is when your dishwasher goes bad or something, and you don't have, these shared experiences that cut across ethnic, racial, class boundaries in a way I think that we once did. So I guess the question is whether there's a way of recovering some of that shared communal experience. So this former army guy that I was just talking to actually is working for an organization. It's aimed at young men that puts them through it's sort of like an outward bound program where they actually get dropped in the woods somewhere and they have to work their way, back to civilization on their own. But the explicit purpose of this is to bond people together by not by making life easy and pleasant, but by making life a little bit challenging and difficult. Because I think that really what bonds people together is shared stress and shared difficulty that they then, have to work together to overcome. And I just don't know whether it's possible at this point in our history to actually artificially create experiences like this. But we certainly don't have a lot of that in the way we interact with each other.
This is also very interesting in how you explore the sliding into nihilism. And you quote Leo Strauss's kind of limited nihilism.
Yeah, no, that's really important. That that lack of a sense of community is what makes people very unhappy and anxious, and that's what makes them listen to this siren song of, these extreme right-wing groups
Strong
that,
gods.
yeah, they allow people to imagine that there is this hidden strong community that they could be part of if only, they all walked in the same direction. And I think you can see a lot of that in the United States right now.
And this way, the logic is a little bit different from how people might just at first glance envision it, because it's not that there is an easing of life because of technological advancement or peacetime, and then somehow from all that laziness, we just somehow slide into decadence, and then there's a nihilistic backlash that wants to make it go away. It's rather that when life becomes easy, we need each other less. We
Yeah.
don't have to rely for basic commodities and achievements on each other. And it's in a kind of Hannah Arendt way, I would imagine, right? Like the lack of community. And by community, we mean a diverse community where there is another person who can tell you when you're being a dummy and you're wrong, or at least like
Hmm.
challenges you, and not
Yeah.
somebody that you pick on the internet. This is what I love about interintellect. Nobody here agrees on anything other than apparently that they all want to come to your salon, but everything else they deeply disagree on. And so you have a lot of that kind of in a safe space ability to challenge each other. But it's really, really rare.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing from professor friends that this ability in certain universities is also under some strain these days.
Yeah. Well, universities are about the most individualistic places in the world. I mean, there's no group of people who have the habit of cooperating with one another in groups less than university professors. You can go through your entire career and not have to talk to a single other professor about anything. Um, and so it does not encourage, shared experience and, strong community. I mean, that's why people then like to go to football games because at least, you've got something in common to cheer about, but you're certainly not going to get it in, your faculty position.
That's fascinating. I know there is a TV show where they make couples fall in love with each other by giving them some big task, some difficulty,
Hmm.
leaving them out in the forest or something,
Yeah.
just realizing that the other person can solve problems and getting an understanding of the other person's personality is somehow more interesting than just answering questions in full makeup. We have our first question, DJ, and then feel free everybody to also raise your hands. And thank you so much. There are a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm going to try to like see something, but the surest way to be heard is to speak.
Um, yeah, so thanks. This is great. Thanks for the opportunity. The question I have, I mean, what are the policy levers, if any? And I'm thinking in particular, I mean, I know you've endorsed abundance. That's generally my approach too, which in a lot of cases is basically just deregulation, right? And sort of instead of devolving power, maybe not make it so easy for local fiefdoms to emerge around zoning and things like that. But you mentioned this outward bound thing. Like I think a national service program would be great, and you could bind it to you can't get a student loan unless you do a year of service, sort of like the GI Bill or something like that. And I'm sure I could spitball a half dozen others, but I mean, are there any sort of positive um, agenda items you'd like to see?
Well, I've always been a big fan of national service, the idea of national service, because, like I said, the one institution that's actually been pretty good at building strong character and community is the military, actually. It's just amazing, in 11 weeks of basic training, you turn these kids that come from single parent families in very poor neighborhoods into Marines. It's a kind of amazing transformation. You don't want to make everybody go into the military necessarily, but I think, uh, what you need to do is establish the principle that you as a citizen are not simply a rights-bearing receiver of benefits from the state, that you actually owe, your fellow citizens a certain amount of um, your own resources. You pay taxes, obviously, but also of your effort and, your abilities, and therefore building a national service around, other kinds of activities is uh, is something that ought to be expected. Now, you started with abundance, and I actually think you can connect this to the abundance movement. This is a kind of longer discussion, but one of the problems with rebuilding community in the United States is simply the problem of scale. That the United States is a country of 340 million people. A real community should involve diversity, and it should involve deliberation where people have different points of view and they talk with one another and they try to come to agreement. I mean, I think that's the ideal way of dealing with, pluralism and diversity. But how the hell you're going to do this with 340 million people on national issues, right? And I think that one way of doing it is scaling it down and having public participation and a structured system of deliberation that deals with, building things, infrastructure, projects. They already do this to some extent. I mean, if you're going to build a multi-story house in San Francisco, they're going to have a lot of public hearings on this. The problem with that is that, first of all, it's completely unstructured, and so anyone can show up. And I think that we have this, I would say, over-organized civil society in the United States where different interest groups are represented by highly professionalized organizations. And when you hold a meeting like this anywhere in California, who shows up? The labor unions, the developers, the environmental groups. You know in advance what their positions are going to be. They don't actually have to speak at the meeting, and they don't deliberate. They just state their positions, and it's just a power contest of who can overpower whom. And I think that there's got to be a way of actually structuring community participation at a local level where people can actually meet face to face that doesn't devolve into this just clash of established interest groups. I mentioned in one of my recent podcasts, Jim Fishkin, he's running a deliberative democracy lab here in my center, and he's got a technique which he calls deliberative polling, in which you actually take a random sample of individuals in a community, bring them together, give them a common stock of information. And his experience is that that almost always leads to actually consensus around a certain, course of action. And so I think it's something we need to experiment with, whether there are ways of building community around more local kinds of projects, not these big national huge issues, but local projects that are going to affect everybody in one locality, that then don't become simply, free-for-alls where, well-organized groups just face off against each other. I don't know whether this is possible, but I think this is one of the challenges that we've got to deal with. And I don't think you can move forward with abundance if you don't have some mechanism for getting that kind of public input, because anything you build is going to hurt somebody's interest. This is why I got interested in infrastructure, because you're trying to achieve a public good, but building that public good always hurts some particular set of interests. And it's up to a democratic political system to reconcile, a collective good against all these individual interests. And we're just terrible at doing that in this country right now. And so there may be a way of encouraging community, through the, you know, mutual deliberation on smaller scale projects.
That's fascinating. And I just do you want to jump in? I saw that you commented something about just the veteran experience so that we don't just talk about the army too much without an expert comment. Do you want to share?
Sorry, my cat wants to join as well
It's
too.
all
Thank
right.
you.
The
No,
multi-species salon.
um, I did jump in that the GI Bill is not alone, the GI Bill. But I agree with DJ that having the idea of having some sort of benefits for service would be great. And I've actually been a proponent of having national service, but not national military service. I am a veteran. I did serve in the Army, but I do know that not everybody belongs in the Army. And so there's a lot of folks whose service could be used in other places in the medical field or building railroads or teaching in schools or volunteering in other places. And I think that if we had some sort of national program like that, that would be great. And if we could provide them the same sort of services or programs that we receive, like the GI Bill or like VA home loans, it would be great. We say in the military that the military is the largest socialist program in the United States. We get all of our medical coverage covered, all of our clothing covered, all of our housing covered, and it is a wonderful thing. And they do go into low income areas and pick off people. Like, I grew up with a single mom. I grew up very low income. And so we're the ones that are put out in the front line to fight the battles because we're the ones that need the money for school. So it would actually be better for society and better for everybody if it wasn't just the poorest kids and the kids coming from people of color neighborhoods and such to be put out to be fighting battles. If it was, everybody volunteering for service across the board, regardless of your wealth or your background. So I agree with something like that. And I do have another question, but I am not in the hand raising line, so I will
You
put
have
my
to
hand
join the
up and let
line.
everybody else.
Thank you so much for the comment. This was fabulous. Thank you. Megan.
Hey,
Hi.
I'm wondering if you've ever put any thought into, I know these are some old ideas, but the way the closing of the American frontier affected American culture and our politics, even it's been like 150 years since then. If you think those consequences are still reverberating, and if that's something that you've ever seen dovetail with some of your ideas, particularly about the end of history and the last man.
Yeah, so I don't think that you need an actual frontier and empty land to inspire people. One of the things that strikes me is that we have not had really kind of ambitious national projects that uh, ever since the ending of the Apollo moon program. If you think about the New Deal, they did an incredible amount of building of big things, big ambitious things. So the Golden Gate Bridge, Hoover Dam, the Tennessee Valley Authority, all of these things were built in the space of about 3 or 4 years by the United States, acting through its federal government that organized these things. They funded it, they recruited people. And in a way, the Apollo program was really one of the most amazing things. I mean, Kennedy says we're going to get to the moon in a decade, and they actually managed to do it. And we, now have privatized a lot of that activity. So I kind of like the idea of going to Mars, but I just don't want to see this weirdo oligarchical, billionaire be the one that that pulls it off. I would much rather see that as a national public project that, we're all collectively involved in. And that's why, again, I mean, to get back to abundance, there's good reasons why we don't take on these big ambitious projects because they're too difficult. We put way too many obstacles in the path of actually doing something like the TVA again or like Hoover Dam. And that's why I think it would be inspiring. I don't think you need an actual frontier. You want to really, transform the country. You want to make this energy transition a reality for everybody. There's plenty of ambitious collective things that we could be doing that we just haven't had the will to achieve. So we still
If I
have
may
a
ask,
frontier.
if I may ask a quick clarifying follow-up, something that's very distinct about the frontier versus the kind of collective action problem you're describing is the frontier is disorganized. It can be very individualistic and no one is in control. So I think it's a very different cultural situation than what you're describing. And it's something that even if we were to try to go to outer space, the kind of technological necessities wouldn't allow that sort of freewheeling experience that you had on the American frontier, or when there's a terra incognita that is not as inhospitable as outer space. Do you have any comments on that, on the kind of
Yeah,
loss of that disorganized experience?
but I think you want an organized experience because what you want to do is build social capital. I think setting off with your family in the frontier, competing with everybody else that's setting off in the same direction, I don't think that that actually builds community necessarily. I do think that you really want to have people working together to accomplish something really, big and notable, and that's what's going to leave a lasting impact. I mean, yeah, so that really was the experience of all the New Deal programs and then eventually fighting the Second World War is that they were notable and they built community because they were, not individualistic and not terribly diverse. It was everybody agreeing under, some kind of central organizing principle that we wanted to do things together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this kind of takes me back also to a previous question I kind of skipped when we were talking about the catastrophizing language and the loss of the social trust. Like, what is an individual to do? Part of the great man theory, which is so, I mean, you write about living in Silicon Valley or the Bay Area at least, and being kind of subjected to that thinking. In my circles, some people truly believe that just one guy, be that Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, whoever, can turn everything around. But when it comes to collective action and when it comes to how to get kids to join some kind of scout system that is not fully militarized, but that will give them these kind of habit forming and community forming experiences, I always wonder, what can we do? Who are the individual, or what layer of society can lend those individuals to the collective that can go and, say, in the state of California, kind of put together a public program? It sounds like something that would take 55 years. And by the time it's done, the kids are elderly. I don't know. Is that, do you see, Frank, any like role models at that we should look into who give you personally hope about this?
Um, well, you've put me on the spot, so I cannot think of any particular ongoing programs, but I suspect that there probably are a lot of small scale things that involve, socializing people to get them to, to work together. And I think that we need, to think a lot harder about that. They need to be depoliticized. So you don't want to get people to work together to undermine the next group over.
Yes.
Um, you want them to do something, and that's why I kind of like things like infrastructure, public housing, or so forth, because there's not a controversy over whether the goal is a good thing,
Yeah.
as opposed to more politicized kinds of activities. But I'm sure that, clever people can think of ways in which you could encourage that kind of joint action.
Like a vaccinate CA, there was this program like around the pandemic
Hmm.
vaccine. I think
Yeah.
maybe it's true that Europeans are all commies, but I think this is more common in Europe, where I don't know, the Dutch mums of a certain street will like band together and make a community garden on a Wednesday and then move on with their lives. I definitely hope that this will be more common in America. I was recently at a female founder dinner and sitting on this in this beautiful space in Manhattan. I don't know, 40 extremely highly educated, very talented women, and me. I have no idea what I was doing there. And I was thinking, like, oh my God, if this had been in 1965 as opposed to 2025, all of these women would be politically active. They would all belong to some group, some local, communal, women's rights, whatever. Nobody belongs to anything other than their own company, their own social media profile. And I hope that this is a temporary situation. Marcus, you also have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So as a warm up to this call, I was watching a talk you gave at the Long Now Foundation back in like 2007. But the topic that came up in that was really interesting to me was the the one of the beginnings of like liberal democracy is this sort of like secularization of a Christian like equality before God turns into an equality before the government. I think like compassion is tied up in that as well. That if we're all equal, we should be compassionate towards one another. Um, I think a lot of like backlash from the American right is seen as like overly or too much compassion from the left, right? Compassion towards criminals or compassion towards immigrants, compassion towards LGBTQ, compassion towards women. But the response to that has been like cruelty and toughness, or at least performative toughness. I guess my question is, do you see a lane for like a tough love sort of political movement, right? That has an actual love, has an actual compassion, but is like tough about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, in theory, that should be. I mean, I think these ideas for national service that we're talking about could be designed in that fashion, where it really does require some sacrifice and self-discipline to actually participate. If you could think about a way of, uh, modifying the current asylum and immigration systems, along those lines, where you actually expected some positive contribution on the part of someone seeking to become part of the national community, that they had to make certain sacrifices in order to do that. If it were equally applied, and rich people couldn't just buy their way out of it, I think that that might actually have some of the, effect that you're suggesting. Um, I guess the problem you'll immediately run into is, should you only subject immigrants to this, or shouldn't, this kind of service be actually an expectation for all citizens as a, condition of service? Or maybe there are certain privileges that, require a level of service, that we don't require right now. Yeah, so I think there are probably a lot of ways that you could build in that kind of expectation. I think that the prior condition for this is changing people's mentality as to, their expectations from citizenship, that it should not simply be a matter of the government giving you benefits and, you're enjoying rights, but that everybody as a condition for that also needs to uh, carry out certain duties. And, I think that's a point that we're not really close to right now.
Which might also be related to conscription, right? I mean, this is the Tocquevillian idea
Mm-hmm.
of like what the government should do, taxes and war, and otherwise get out of there, leave it to
Yeah.
the locals. When there is no war,
Mm-hmm.
I always see that, the militarization that is ongoing right now in American cities is a very interesting kind of yin-yang pair to America withdrawing from the global stage, at least in a systemic way, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there are all these like surprise interventions because you have huge military R&D gigantic spend. They
Mm-hmm.
want to fight clearly downward male mobility in certain places, for which some kind of conscription is a solution, but they can't send the troops overseas, so we
Mm-hmm.
will see them inside.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's other kind of useful work that's not military that, potentially could be the object of this kind of program.
But for that, you have to profess your empathy, and I don't know if this regime wants to do that.
Yeah, well, there's other practical problems as well. There have been programs in the past to try to get, for example, underprivileged kids to work on construction projects. And this was fiercely opposed by labor unions because they did not want the competition. And yeah, so uh, yeah, the political realities, I think, of the way America works are there's a lot of them.
Yeah. It's like a chess game. Everybody's a little bit against everybody. Revi, you also have your hand up. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion so far. One of the most interesting arguments I thought in your end of history book was the idea that recognition is kind of the human drive for recognition is kind of the main motor of progress or progression towards liberal democracy. And I was wondering if in the last 30 years or 30 plus years since you wrote that, if there were any updates or changes you had to the way recognition functions in politics. Like, I don't know if the failure of China to liberalize or the existence of social media or any phenomena like that would change your views on how you see recognition leading to liberal democracy, or if you think that that's covered just by the idea that everybody's getting their hyper-thumatic aspect of themselves kind of activated by these events, and the basic thesis kind of holds.
Yeah, there's a couple of different answers to that. So one of them is the following. In the end of History and the Last Man, I made this distinction between two Greek words that I made up, megalothumia and isothumia, right? And isothumia is a broadly shared desire to be equally recognized, that people get very indignant if somebody else is given a privilege that they think they are equally entitled to. And democracy, in a way, is built around equal recognition and the demand that we should all be given the same set of basic equal rights. But megalothymia is the desire to be recognized as superior to other people. This is a problem, obviously, for democracy because it is, it potentially contradicts this principle of equal recognition. On the other hand, you're not going to live in a healthy society if you don't have people that have these ambitions to be better than other people. Better baseball player, a better musician, a better painter, a better architect. I mean, um, you're not going to have excellence of any sort if you didn't have people striving to be recognized for some excellence, some superiority in some way. And the task is not to get rid of this megalothymia, this desire to be recognized as better, but to channel it in safe ways. Now, I actually wrote about Donald Trump in the original book. And what I said back then was that the great thing about a capitalist economy is that it provides an outlet for megalothymia that is socially productive. That if you want to get fabulously rich by building a big company and creating a lot of wealth, you can do it in a capitalist society and you couldn't in a socialist one. And that might serve as an escape valve for these the pressures, that are driving people to want to be better. And I gave Donald Trump as an example of this, that, uh, here's a would-be dictator that's now just a rich businessman, and that's fine. And little did I expect that it wouldn't be enough. That in addition, well, I mean, first of all, his fortune was kind of phony, but in addition to having this rich and famous lifestyle, he also wanted political power and, our system wasn't enough to bleed off that energy into a more productive, path. And so it's a problem that I think we've not fully solved, that the highest forms of recognition really oftentimes for many people do revolve around, political power. I keep thinking about, the American presidency. It is, if you're one of these people that wants recognition, there's just nothing better than being president. It's absolutely nothing better than, because everybody around you is going to be telling you, you're the greatest, that was a great decision, that was a great speech. Uh, you know, Historically, there's no parallel to you. I mean, everybody's got an incentive to accord you, that kind of honor. And I think it really actually distorts people's character. I remember Spig Brzezinski, who I got to know fairly well, was saying that you couldn't imagine a more humble person than Jimmy Carter when he started out as president. But by the end of his 4-year term, he had really changed because the presidency changed him and because, its expectations for, just over the top recognition were something that even the, kind of an intrinsically modest person like Carter, even he was affected by that. So I think thinking through how you deal with that desire for, that kind of extreme recognition is something that I didn't get right back then, and I'm not sure I still get it right. How you channel things into positive, socially positive activities as opposed to ones that are, destructive.
And it wasn't a problem with Trump that he was too humble at the beginning either.
No,
He did
definitely
not
not.
start from zero.
Yeah,
I mean, this is when somebody expects Putin to act reasonably, and I always think the guy hasn't been told no in 27 years.
yeah,
Like you can be a saint. If that happens to you, you are going to atrophy as a person in one way or another. Have you seen the movie House of Dynamite, the nuclear?
no, no.
It goes to the extreme of when is the moment when nobody is kissing up to the president anymore
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
there's a nuclear war and there's this like maybe not the best movie, but for this particular reason of what is the when everything kind of retreats to that one decision point where nobody can help you.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
beautifully captured, I think, in the movie. Nick, you have a question as well, and this is your first intern salon, starting right in the deep water. I get it. Other people go to a poetry reading club fast. It's amazing.
Yeah, excited
Hi,
to be engaging.
and
Hi.
asking a question. I love it. It's a good participant.
Yeah. So I was curious, Dr. Fukuyama, if you could give your retrospective assessment of the Mamdani campaign. So I think the one of the prevailing narratives that I heard around it was that it was focused on affordability, which I don't know if I necessarily fully agree with that. If you think of his media strategy with like the street interviews and also some of the overtures he made to immigrant struggles, but I wonder if it illustrates a point where um, economic or material interests can have greater salience than thumos. And then also relatedly to that, it does strike me as a little bit interesting that you're fully on board the abundance train, given that I think of it as kind of more of a materialist or maybe technocratic solution when so much of your work is focused on thumos as an animating uh, societal driver.
Yeah, well, I don't discount material motives, and I know that a lot of people in New York City are struggling, materially, and so it makes sense that you'd want your rent to be capped, or you'd want free bus service, or things of that sort. I think that there's a very close relationship between material interests and recognition, because for many people, the kind of job you have and the kind of wages that somebody is willing to pay you for the work you do, uh, it's desirable really not so much for the material benefits, but for the social status that it confers on you. And I think that, again, that's one of the reasons that people don't like to be unemployed, even if they have unemployment insurance, because what a paycheck does is it's a signal that society thinks that what you do is valuable enough and deserving of respect that, they're actually going to pay you for it. Um, so I think that, material deprivation and status deprivation or recognition deprivation, are related to one another, and sometimes by giving people material benefits, you can actually improve their, their self-understanding and their self-esteem. So I don't want you to interpret me as saying that it's all just about, thumos and so forth. I think, however, that in general, the reason that socialist candidates have not been winning nationally is that ultimately, people don't really want the government simply to give them material benefits. In fact, a lot of people get very upset if other people think that that's what they're really after. That's one of the reasons I think something like universal basic income is simply not going to work. Because if everybody, gets a paycheck just for being alive, it confers no dignity and no recognition of you as a, individual and what you are contributing. And therefore, I don't think it's going to satisfy anybody, even if it does take care of your, your day-to-day material needs.
I'm thinking of the Roman clients of patrons, right? Which was a kind of UBI. You just had like the proletariat meant that they were just reproducing, right? Like that was your job. And then you would go there with your little basket in the morning, pick some stuff for your family. But there was a social contract involved. The patron gave you status, right? Like being followed by a big account on Twitter. It's the same thing. And sometimes you would have to go and fight. So there was a little bit of a payment.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in how there's research on how fairness develops in children kind of automatically without intervention. And at around age 3, the kind of completely equal fairness develops where if they all are given the same chores and one of them doesn't get a candy, then the other children are kind of outraged and they will share their own candy with this kid. And at age 6, the kind of work proportional fairness develops, whereby if one kid is told not to do the chore, but he is also given a candy, then now the other kids are angry. Why is Mark getting a candy when he hasn't done anything? And it kind of shows up in different politics. And I always wonder whether that's just arrested development. What age were you arrested?
Yeah.
That will be your ideology. Jess, you will be our last question. What a beautiful circle to do here. Talk about the dialectic. The spirit is returning into itself.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Fukuyama, for being here today. This has been such a treat. I'm so excited. And I'm glad for Nick's question because I'm in New York, and so I'm part of the group that just elected Mayor Mamdani,
We'll
our
fight this
new.
side out after this.
We will be fighting this out. But Anna's gonna love this question because I can't stop talking, and she knows what's coming. I can't stop talking about this. I recently, because it all kind of comes together, and I can't pass up this opportunity to ask you about this. I recently read this book by Yanis Varoufakis. I'm not saying his name right, I'm sure, called Techno-Feudalism: What Killed Capitalism. You may be familiar with him and
Yeah.
his ideology. And so I just got all these ideas, and I'm not an economist. I didn't know anything about it, but I just got all these ideas in the book where he argues that essentially all of these groups, or all these companies like Apple, Facebook, Meta, have changed the economy so much that it now resembles like a European medieval feudal system. And these tech giants are the feudal lords, and the rest of us are just serfs working for them. And so this new feudalism is essentially going to kill capitalism, and that's going to be the end of capitalism, rather than socialism or communism being the end of capitalism. And so what I wanted to ask you about it is your thoughts on this, because you had written earlier in the year about Elon Musk and how Elon Musk was the new oligarchy, and how he, much like Silvio Berlusconi, had invented the modern oligarchy. And so do you sort of have these same ideas, especially now with Mamdani being elected? Like, are we in this like pivotal moment where capitalism is sort of withering away on the vine here?
Um, I don't think that capitalism is the target of, or I don't think that that's the problem. The problem is really democracy. I think that when you have a layer of people that have as much wealth and who can use that wealth to influence politics to the extent that Elon Musk did, it's just not healthy for a society that, is based on the idea of one man or one woman, one vote, and everybody has kind of an equal share in, the collective decision making. Um, the capitalist system really depends on competition. And I think that's still there. I think that despite the existence of these gigantic companies, you can still have newcomers that, end up being very competitive. I think, scale is just something that's been very easy to achieve with software companies, and that's why they're so big. But they don't become really problematic until they start translating some of that wealth into political influence. And the Berlusconi comparison is when they use that political influence to then help their own bottom lines, as companies and protect, use their political power to keep out competitors. That's when it becomes very economically destructive. Um, so I think that in general, in a democracy, you need to worry about extreme concentrations of wealth. I think in the tech sector, it's sufficiently competitive and, just the ability to innovate is such that I think, I worry less about the future of capitalism in that sense than I do about the future of democracy.
Thank you so much. Competition is not for losers. Somebody will lose it, but not everybody.
Yeah.
Francis Fukuyama, thank you so much for visiting us on Interact and sharing your wisdom. We love reading you. I don't know how
Okay.
you're this prolific. You're making us all look bad, but also we are deeply inspired. I love the participating cats and dogs in this salon. We sometimes have a lot of children also showing up. It's a completely communal space. Um, Next September, so next year, 2026 September, Frank's memoir will be published. Maybe you will come back and discuss it with us. I can't wait to read it. I
Okay.
loved this. I love this book as well. It's so beautifully, it's such a beautiful defense of something that honestly, when I was a kid and the Berlin Wall fell, and then we worked so hard, and then my birth country joined the EU. I had no idea that one day I would move to America and see the same thing happen over and over again. It's kind of traumatizing, but there is, I think, a responsibility that comes with understanding these things, and that's talking about it, bringing people
Right.
together, debating. Even I will even accept Mamdani if I have to, if he allows that. Thank you so much, Frank. This has been a
Okay.
pleasure. And
Thank
if
you,
you
Anna,
don't
for
follow
having me.
Frank on Instagram, go and do it because it's phenomenal. There is furniture making, music, travel, food, children, everything that's good about life, abundance.
Okay.
Thank you
Nice to
so
talk to
much.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.